Again, Shana Tova to everybody. It is nice to be in shul with people. And of course, we always extend our greetings, our Shana Tova to those who are at home. And we pray for the day when you're able to be back here in the shul with us. When I was in high school, our senior prom's theme was changes. It was a David Bowie song. I don't know if you recall that. We're not going to sing today. Oh. I do want to tell you a story about singing, though. So my first year as an assistant rabbi, this has nothing to do with my sermon. We're just a small group here today. Of course, there are millions watching around the world. And the reason why I know that is because I know people have been sharing the password. I do know there is a couple in Sweden that watches. I don't know how they got our link, but whatever. Anyway, so my first year as an assistant rabbi in a very large shul, and if you haven't noticed, I'm a pretty fun-loving guy. And the senior rabbi where I was working is very serious, a guy named Rabbi Vernon Kurtz, a very, very serious guy. And I was rubbing off on him. And one year, for the holidays, he sang the Itsy Bitsy Spider. And I got the credit for it. So, but that has nothing to do with anything. I think it does in some way, of course, because in many ways I was rubbing off on him, he was rubbing off on me. The style that I came into the rabbinate with was a very different style than I have now. It's because people rub off on us. And please God, we rub off on other people, and that's how we grow and change in our lives. Growing is important. And so I often say, grow through the changes. It's such an important idea to grow through the changes, because in life, the only thing that is constant is change. And there is change for the sake of change, and there is meaningful change. There's change of our own choosing, and there is change that is thrust upon us. But no matter, as the saying goes, the only thing constant in life, of course, is change. The past 2 years have seen change thrust upon us. And some of those changes will remain, and some of those changes will disappear. Some of life will return to the way it was, and some of life will never be the same. And change is hard. So before we talk about change this morning, I want to offer you one piece of advice from Sabina Laura, who said, "They tell you to be grateful for what you have, but you're also allowed to be sad for what you've lost." So let's let that sink in for a minute as we begin to talk about changes. Let's take a moment in honor and be grateful for what we have, but also to be sad for what we've lost. And we have lost so much. Not just possessions, and not just livelihood for so many, but a basic understanding. We've lost a basic understanding for how life works and what we expect the future to hold. We've lost so many, not just to death, but the scarring of a year plus in isolation. I'll have so much more to say about what that has done to our psyche come Yom Kippur. But just for a moment to honor the loss. The change that our community has seen is significant. Soon after we began our return to the synagogue, we had a conversation after Kiddush one Shabbos about the very many changes that we made in our synagogue over the course of COVID. So many changes we made even to just the religious life of our community. that were necessitated by the shutdown. Here are a few. I just want to remind you, we had live streaming long before the pandemic. Most of that is because we're prophetic here in Greenberg Hebrew Center. We know what's going to happen and we're prepared well in advance. Wish I could say that of other shuls, but that's why we're unique. But long before the pandemic, we did those things that were necessary to reach out to members of our community because they were unable to be here. And so when it came time to pivot where no one could be here, we had at least live streaming in place, but there were other changes. We had to abbreviate the service because for those of us who were here in person, the fear of being in close proximity with people for an extended period of time required us to abbreviate our service. We started going to people's homes for smachot, for bar and bat mitzvahs. We ended up doing them in people's backyards. Sometimes we held online classes. Shiva minyanim were done through Zoom. And of course, one of the more significant changes is the fact that we rearranged our sanctuary again. And we're back to the way things were a long time ago. Now, I'll be honest with you, I like sitting up here. No one bothers me. I'm kidding. I like to be bothered. No, I don't. But we changed purposefully to move the cantor and the rabbi off the bimah so that we could be closer to you. And now we're feeling the social distance of what once was a hierarchical form of Judaism. We went from sitting in the round, looking at each other, to facing forward. And that is a loss. Some of us felt the changes that were necessitated by this pandemic, and we feel as though those changes were forced on us. The rabbis refer to that as a shat hadchak, an emergent moment, a time that requires extraordinary measures. The Talmud in the tractate of Eruvin taught the following. Rabbi Yehuda said, it happened during a time of danger. We would carry the scroll of the Torah from courtyard to roof, and from roof to courtyard, and from courtyard to enclosure to read from it. Rabbi Yehuda's response was, if people can't get to the Torah, bring the Torah to them. And that required removing it from the safety of an ark and exposing it to the dangers of the elements outside. In times of danger, said Rabbi Yehuda, we have to do things that are out of the ordinary to keep our people connected to Torah. And we here at GHC did our best to bring our songs and our ceremonies, our rites of passage, to each and every one of you as best we could. And I know there were inconsistencies, but we tried our best. To be sure, in some cases, there is no doubt in my mind we've gone too far. You know the phrase that sometimes you throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's horrible. And I've worried about every decision that we've made because in some cases, those changes are irreversible. Yesterday, you noted that we ended much earlier than we have ever ended. Today, probably even earlier. And people will grow to expect that. It means that I'll have to cut out all of those fun anecdotes that I have done in the past. And the great jokes that keep people laughing. And the snippets. One year, I gave 30 sermon topics. Topics that I had gathered that I was going to preach on and then chose not to, but at least I gave you the titles. It's possible that the cantor and I won't feel that freedom in years to come because people's expectation of an abbreviated service is irreversible. I worry that in some cases we've opened the door to results that will cause irreparable damage to our faith, to our tradition, to our practice. I wonder whether people will come back at all. And I wonder when they come back, what they will come back to. I'm afraid that live streaming makes it so easy to roll out of bed and grab a cup of coffee and sit down in your pajamas and watch what we do here. That people will say, why bother coming on over? Maimonides taught us, She'amru chachamim arishonim, chalel alav shabbat achad kedei sheyishmor shabbatot harbei. Maimonides says to us, it's okay that in these circumstances to do things that may appear to damage our tradition. But don't worry. There's so much more ahead of us. Maimonides gives the example that if you are ill and you're afraid that you're going to die, that it's okay to break Shabbos in order to be able to survive. And he says it's better to give up one Shabbos than to give up all Shabbatot. It's a wonderful example to us, but what happens when you realize that Shabbos morning you'd rather do something else? You'd rather not participate in communal Judaism, and you don't want to come to shul. Have we opened the door to that? A court says our tradition may suspend the application of decrees temporarily, even if it's of a lesser stature than the original court, so that the decrees should not be considered more severe than words of the Torah. Every generation is continuously refining our traditions so that we understand that we must meet people where they are, so that we can bring people closer. Even if this generation isn't as great as the previous generations, the rabbis say, you do what you need to do in order to make sure you connect with people. I've told the story so many times. I used to say to my father when he was preparing for the holidays, a man who had been in the rabbinate for over 40 years, I used to say, what are you getting so nervous about? And he would say, I have to come up with the exact right words this year that will bring the people back, or at least won't turn them off for years to come. And there's no question that my father's generation was a far greater generation than mine, and his father's generation greater than his. And every generation works its very hardest in order to make sure that we make Judaism relevant, connective, communal, and covenantal. And so the rabbis already write in, do what you got to do to keep people connected. And while it all makes good sense, and you know we are practical people if nothing else, we're still left with the challenges of the changes that will remain, and which I pray will not be the demise of one of the great forces in our universe, and we call that Judaism. We pray that our Judaism doesn't give way to apathy. It's time to recommit. I know it's just easier not to come back. I know it's just easier to flip on the TV or a computer. It's just easier to do nothing. And I'll be honest with you, I too am exhausted from fighting this fight of a pandemic day after day, week after week, month after month, and now year after year. We're all tired. It makes sense. We're physically exhausted and we're emotionally overwhelmed. And so it's easy to just do nothing, to say, today I'm just going to sit on the couch. There have been so many things that have changed in our homes, in our work, in our lives, how we spend our free time, how we structure our day. For some, thankfully, family meals have returned. For some, working at home has meant real isolation, birthing in some cases extraordinary creativity, in others unbelievable sadness. For some, businesses have disappeared, and for others, work has been nonstop. Please God, we're coming out of this overwhelming and devastating challenge, and we have decisions to make and choices to make, and we must be thoughtful about them, and we must find ways to follow through. For so long, it's been easy to say, I don't feel comfortable, I'm just going to stay home. I'd rather not be with other people because of my fear. I'd rather stay home. To those of you who are here today, I thank you for overcoming those challenges. For those of you at home, I say I wait for you with open arms for when you're ready. The word disruptive change is all the buzz now. Society needs disruptive change in order to take the next step forward. But change for the sake of disruption is not helpful. Change for the sake of disruption is destructive. So we all need to restart. We all need to find a way to reset. So let me offer you just a brief checklist of questions you can ask yourself in order to take back control in your own life. Because we need to make thoughtful, responsible, proactive, and reactive choices about the changes we're going to make in our lives. While we recognize that the Serenity Prayer reminds us there are things over which we have no control, here's a simple list of questions. Why change? What are you going to benefit from that change, and what are you going to lose? Decide what it is that you're going to change. Decide at which speed you're going to change. And decide who in your life is going to make those changes with you and who's going to fight you. Let me just mention one thing about speed of change. My father always taught, revolution is unstable, evolution is long-lasting. Change that's done quickly usually doesn't last. Change that evolves over time can have extraordinary experience and extraordinary impact. So I say to you, no matter what changes you make them slowly so they'll last. We need to ask ourselves which organizations and which community, which people, whether they're family or friendship circles, are going to need to change, and which ones we love the way they are. We must realize there is also one more category of change. It's called impossible change. And we must grasp that there are forces that force change in our lives that we may be unable to handle. That's the most difficult. They used to tell us in rabbinical school that when you arrive in a new shul, a new congregation, you can try and make changes, just don't change the liturgy. Nobody wants to come to shul and hear something brand new. You just want the same thing. So make all other changes first, then work on the service. You know how much you love the same sounds that you hear all the time. We are so blessed to have a chazan who has the repertoire and the expansive knowledge of our liturgy and the melodies that go along with it, that while we feel right at home, we also recognize there's change coming around the corner. And there is beautiful music alongside it. David Brooks wrote an article in 2011 entitled The Limits of Empathy. He says, we're surrounded by people trying to make the world a better place. Empathy makes you more aware of other people's suffering, but it's not clear if it actually motivates you to take moral action, or if it prevents you from making a choice that's good. In one experiment in the 1970s, David Brooks writes, the researchers planted a dime in a phone booth. 87% of the people who found the dime offered to help a nearby person who dropped some papers, compared with 4% of people who didn't find a dime. Empathy doesn't produce anything like this kind of effect. There's something that motivates you to act. Moreover, empathy, he writes, often leads people astray. It leads us to react to shocking incidents like a hurricane, but not to long-standing conditions like global hunger and preventable disease. Nobody is against empathy. Nonetheless, Brooks writes, it is insufficient. These days, empathy has become a shortcut. And then he concludes, empathy is a sideshow. Well, I'm not sure that empathy is a sideshow. I certainly believe it is insufficient. If you want to make the world a better place, then you must do something, not just feel something. In 586 BCE, the temple was destroyed, and the Jewish people were expelled from our land. And over time, we made it back to Israel, and we rebuilt. And then in 70 CE, the second temple was destroyed, and we were once again dispersed. But we returned. But this time, we never rebuilt the temple. We replaced it with something else, with other institutions, other places to worship, to gather, to be together. It wasn't something or a place that we went to just 3 times a year. It was a place that we went to all the time. We replaced the temple with the synagogue, and it has been around since then. We have no idea what we will rebuild. We have no idea what we will replace with identical replicas, or what we will invent to replace with something even better. But we must be thoughtful and dedicated, committed and determined. We cannot let lethargy and apathy be the determinant of our future. Mahatma Gandhi once said, the difference between what we do and what we're capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the world's problems. Let me just say it again. The difference between what we do and what we're capable of doing is sufficient to solve most of the world's problems. Avinu Malkeinu chatanu lefanecha, chanenu va'anenu ki ein banu ma'asim aseh imanu chesed, tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu. Our God, our parent, our sovereign, have mercy on us. Answer us, for our deeds are insufficient. Deal with us charitably and lovingly redeem us. Deal with us charitably. This is the moment. This is an 8 ratzon. Today we call that an inflection point. This is a determining moment when we have to commit ourselves to doing more, to helping more, to realigning our priorities. This is the moment of thoughtful decision making. Yet today is not what's important, tomorrow is. And so one plea. Every sermon has a commercial. We need your help to rebuild. We need your help to bring people back. But I beg of you to do it with compassion. We must begin the difficult process of getting our programs going again. We have to engage people in our classes again. We have to restart our daily minyan and get more people to read Torah on Shabbos. We need your partnership in growing our schools and supporting every effort of our congregation. We need you to get the word out that our little shul is a little shul that could. We need you to get the word out that we're here and we're not going anywhere. In fact, we continue to grow. There is an influx of people in our neighborhood. And I need you to do this. Go knock on your neighbor's door, especially if they have a mezuzah on it. And tell them we want you to be a part of our community. And when new people walk into our neighborhood, welcome them. Say hello. Don't play that game of, will they say hello to me first? Or should I start the conversation? And then I pray that you'll do it the way we have always done it here at GHC. The way we'll always do it here, allowing people to move at their own pace with a kind and gentle hand-holding. As for you who are here today and are watching at home, please know that the cantor, Amy, myself are always here for you. The words we offer today are meaningless without the actions of tomorrow. Make your change. Stick to it. But be compassionate about it. If you try something and it doesn't stay, try again, but don't beat yourself up over it. It's hard. Compassionate change is what we're all about, so be compassionate to yourself. Understand, change is difficult. So be gentle and then get right back to it. Shana Tova. We continue with Musaf, page 123. Chatzi Kaddish, please rise.